But police say this time the suspect was successful in his efforts to lure a little girl into his clutches. He allegedly promised her a quarter before raping her and ending her life.
The older sister of 7-year-old Divina Genao let her tears fall freely this morning while her mother clutched the picture of the child who was savagely killed Wednesday night 3 blocks away from home.
Another child is being mourned today. Tears and an anguished final farewell for little Divina Genao, who was kidnapped, raped, and murdered last week. Family, friends, and neighbors joined in the funeral services for the little 7-year-old girl who was kidnapped near her home while playing with friends.
Doing with the little girl.
And Davina's mother had already called police. 17 minutes after the kidnapping, they were at Jeffrey's door.
Divina Genao was born on February 12, 1986, in New Jersey. She was born to her mother, Jocelyn Genao, and resided in the Passaic section with her mother and siblings. Davina was just 7 years old and a first grader at William B. Cruz Elementary School number 11. According to those who knew little Davina, she was known to be a very trusting and sweet child. Her first grade teacher, Miss Diggs, would describe her as being lovely. Like a lot of kids her age, Davina had made plenty of friends and spent her time playing and being a kid. Some of the kids she would play with were right in her building where her family lived, at 240 Gregory Avenue, a 4-story brick building filled with Latinos, many of the families having young children just like little Davina. In this relatively safe stretch of a neighborhood that wasn't the best, kids could be seen playing all the time, but children were often warned of the dangers that lurked in the streets beyond the front of that building. Evil people with intentions that could cost young children their lives. But still, playing outside in front of the building was normal. The kids in the area did it often and parents would keep a close eye. The kids were safe, but as often is the case, not every child would be this lucky. Because on the night of Wednesday, May 5th of 1993, a monster stalking the area would prey on little Davina, and his heinous actions would result in her family never seeing her alive again. According to reports, on this night, at around 9:50 p.m., little Davina, her 9-year-old sister, and a friend were outside in front of the Gregory Avenue apartment building when they were approached by a man. The man would ask the children if they wanted to race him around the block back to the front of the building, and he would give the winner a quarter. The man and children ran around the block, and the small boy who accompanied little Davina and her sister won. The man gave him a quarter for his victory, as promised, but then he would start to hint to the kids that he wanted them to come somewhere with him. Davina's sister said no, and told her little sister not to go either, but the man grabbed little Davina by her wrist and started to walk away with her. By this point, the little kids who had just ran around the block were out of breath. The trusting child walked away with this man, not heeding her sister's warning as the man spoke to her, saying things her sister couldn't make out. The man would pull on little Davina, taking her by force. Understandable, seeing as how she was only 7 years old, and she was easily overpowered. Davina's sister would follow this man and Davina for a short while as he pulled on her. Her sister wouldn't be able to keep up with them, and the two couldn't be seen anymore. Little Davina's sister would run back home to tell her mother that she couldn't find Davina, and she told her about this strange man. Her mother would call the police straight away. Within minutes, cops arrived and the search for little Davina was underway. They had a description of the man, but that was all. They would comb the neighborhood for any traces of Davina before speaking to an informant who told officers where this man lived, although he wouldn't give the man's name. About 30 minutes after the abduction, authorities were led to a rooming house at 115 Gregory Avenue. The monster in question was 42-year-old Conrad Jeffrey, a man with a very lengthy rap sheet and violent criminal past. He once abducted a 14-year-old girl after he stalked her for weeks, bringing her to railroad tracks to violate her at knife point. She escaped thanks to a friend coming across them and creating a commotion. And just as shocking, he was wanted for the murder of a Newark woman in 1974. However, an 8-year stint in a Trenton psychiatric ward would result in most of his criminal past vanishing from his record. In addition, there was terrible communication between the criminal justice and mental health systems in place at the time, causing him to fall through the cracks. He had just been released from prison 6 weeks before this. This man should have never been free. A witness by the name of James Bullard would confirm he saw Jeffrey with a young girl that night and asked who she was. Little Davina wasn't struggling and holding Jeffrey's hand, according to Bullard. This didn't feel right to Bullard, who was almost ready to eat, but found himself with no appetite after seeing Jeffrey and the little girl. It felt very off to him, and that feeling of something being wrong just continued to grow in him. He decided to go back outside some time later, and he saw Jeffrey again. This time, he was alone. Jeffrey would tell Bullard he was going to take a shower and turn in for the night.
I said to him, "Where are you going with that little girl?" And he said to me that was his friend's daughter. And I said, "I didn't ask you who it was, I asked you where you were going." And he never answered. He just said that I'd be back in a little while.
Meantime, Davina's mother had already called police. 17 minutes after the kidnapping, they were at Jeffrey's door.
They were banging on the door to get him to open it. And he wouldn't open it. And then when he did open it, they made him get down on the floor. And that's when I saw the little girl, and I don't know whether she was on a blanket or whatever, but she was partially clothed and looked like she was tied up or something.
A short time after, Bullard would hear pounding on the door across the hall where Jeffrey lived, and the ones doing the pounding were police. Police were trying to get inside of the apartment, and from the outside of the door, they could hear what they believed to be the muffled sounds of screams and someone walking around. When they finally made their way in, Jeffrey lunged at officers but didn't injure anybody. He was wrestled to the ground and arrested, but just feet away, little Davina's partially nude body could be seen, either on the ground or a piece of furniture. According to Bullard, who could see from the hallway, little Davina was gray and lifeless. They tried their best to revive her, but they were too late. She would be pronounced dead later that night at General Hospital Center in Passaic. The crime was shocking to say the least, but the nature of little Davina's injuries would only make things much worse. When they found little Davina, she was suffering from blunt force trauma, since Jeffrey had delivered vicious blows to her face, her head, her limbs, and her genitals. She was bound and gagged, and he would violate her relentlessly before strangling her and leaving her to die, finally carrying out his sick and horrifying act that he had attempted in the past. Thanks to miscommunication, the monster was repeatedly given lenient sentences and let free time and time again, giving him the opportunity to carry this out. Because of those decisions, he was free and able to easily take little Davina's life. And to top it off, when this happened, it was barely even recognized on the news. It was briefly covered by local news for maybe a week, but many feel that if little Davina hadn't been Latina, the coverage might have been handled completely differently, and this case would have gotten more attention. It's hard to argue with that when this is something that is still a huge topic today. Jeffrey was sentenced to a minimum of 75 years in prison without parole. He'll most likely die behind bars.
For this Wednesday in a New Jersey courtroom, as a man accused of raping and murdering a 7-year-old girl came face to face with her grieving relatives.
What happened was that an uncle of the victim could not control himself and lunged at the suspect, Conrad Jeffrey, who was charged in this terrible case. Now, while that drama played out inside, angry residents fed up with the criminal justice system protested outside. Channel 2's Reggie Harris is live for us in Patterson now with more on this disturbing event. Reggie?
Well, Carol, it's been quite a raucous scene out here in the streets in front of the Passaic County Courthouse. It has calmed down significantly in just the past few minutes now. The crowd here has been growing all morning. They are primarily from Passaic, from the neighborhood where 1 week ago, 7-year-old Divina Genao was abducted and later found bound and gagged, suffocated in the room of 42-year-old Conrad Jeffrey. Today, as Jeffrey's arraignment was ending, the suspect was attacked in the courtroom by one of the slain girl's teenage brothers. You'll see as he moves, he comes across the top, the brother there. That set off court officers and people in the court. There seemed to have been some misunderstanding about what had happened at the arraignment. As people came out, they told us that he had been given bail and that he was released.
When this first happened, even while fighting through her grief, little Davina's mother wanted reporters and news outlets to report on her daughter's tragic passing, because she wanted parents out there to know the dangers that lurk where we all reside. So let's make sure we keep Davina in our thoughts and let her story be known. Rest in peace to little Divina Genao, and my deepest condolences go out to our loved ones. You aren't forgotten.
Police say this burly paroled criminal, Conrad Jeffrey, snatched the child about 9 o'clock that night, took her to this boarding house on the same avenue, raped her, beat her, then strangled her. The child's sister was there during the initial abduction.
I was playing outside with my sister. Then he took my sister with their hands. Then he pushed her on the floor. Then I don't know where they went.
Tragic is that other parents say they noticed Jeffrey lurking around other children 2 weeks ago.
Constantly just up and down the street and asking kids questions about basketball and baseball, trying to form teams for the summer to keep